want to open up to questions from the audience. We have someone going around, yes, with a microphone. So let's hear, would you please address your questions to each person? Do I have someone with a question? Sort of hard to see over the lights. Oh, there's somebody at the back.
I don't think
Yes.
I need a microphone, do I?
Maybe it's better to use it just so everybody really hears it.
I don't think we can get.
Oh, okay.
That's
do you wanna-
okay.
That's all right,
Okay.
yeah.
This is a non-musical question. During the period of the Soviet Union, were composers required to submit scores for approval?
If they wanted to get paid, yeah.
And are there any examples of changes made to scores that have been published?
Do you know Prokofiev's Seventh Symphony?
Pardon me?
Do you know Prokofiev's Symphony Number 7? He changed the ending.
Prokofiev's Symphony Number 7.
Prokofiev famously changed the ending of his Symphony Number 7 in response to criticism. He made it more upbeat. It was deemed to be too morose, too melancholy in its initial version. So yeah, I mean, we could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about examples. Shostakovich, Edney. Rostrovet's entire career is an example.
Yeah, yeah.
And did that end after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991?
Yeah, but then economic forces began to rear their heads, and it became much more complicated for economic reasons. If you want, there's a great dissertation by William Quillen at Berkeley who talks about this and how composers altered their styles to sound more Western in order to attract interest in the West because they thought that's where the paychecks were going to come from. So absolutely, it changed.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Another question, please. Okay, over here. Do you need the microphone?
I'll just scream.
Okay.
I'll just scream it from
Thank
here.
you.
I'm here.
Hey, Phil.
Thank you all for your free presentations. You mentioned the word atonal in the score by Silvestrov, and it was in parentheses, but it was also in the scare quotes, low and high. And so I thought about 2 or 3 things, at least 2. The scare quotes could mean like earlier in the Soviet Union or mid-century, atonal was Western and it was exotic, and like, we don't really know what atonal means. Nobody really does, but at any rate, it was just kind of like in deference to the West. But then a little later, I could imagine he might have been thinking, oh yeah, atonal, right. Like a little sardonic or something. So why the scare quotes, basically? Like, what was he really thinking? Because if he just wanted to say it, he would just say atonal without any quotes at all.
I'm trying to remember, there's another score. In drama, there's a moment in the manuscript for that piece where he says early music. It's also in quotes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could just be what he does. In those moments, it's supposed to be like another kind of music is intruding into his language.
Okay.
I don't think it's sardonic. At this point in his career, I don't think it's meant sardonically. But it's a good question.
Okay.
It's a weird annotation, certainly.
Yeah. Since I have, let me just do one for Leah and then I'm done.
Please.
I asked you a question. I heard this talk before. Thank you. There was one graph where you had the National Symphony Orchestra of Ukraine with Jewish Soviet composers, Ukrainian, the one with the Jewish composers and nationality. And there were 2 years that were like almost none. One was 2013. That was just blue, and it was like nothing at all. But all the other, and there was one other which was blue and orange and still down. But all the others had quite a bit. Was there anything in those 2 years, 2013 and 2016 maybe?
Not that I have been able to identify specifically. My sense is that these changes aren't sort of linear necessarily, right? It's not that we've just made this decision and now from here forward everything's going to be going up. And like I said, I mean, my impression from talking to people in Ukraine is that in some ways this is not necessarily even a decision that's in the front of people's minds. It just seems to be something that is sort of organically changing as the sense of what a civic Ukrainian identity means is changing. So I think my impression was like sort of the overall trend of the last 5 years is going one way, but yes, there are years here and there where there's a weird dip. But when I compared this 5 years to the previous 10 years, let's say, there was definitely a remarkable increase. You can sort of draw a line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yes, yes, in the back. Please, do you
Yeah.
want to just say?
I'll just shout.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question for Leah. Yesterday, my call said that the younger generation, literary generation, is sort of making inroads in the West with through translations and publishers, like Chanel has reading.
Mhm.
Are you finding that the younger Ukrainian composers are having inroads in American culture outside the Ukrainian community?
I have to say, no, not really, almost not at all in my experience. It's actually one of the reasons why we wanted to start doing this festival as an opportunity to give a platform to those composers, myself and my co-organizer from Kiev, Ludmila Yanina. We thought that, New York is a great place for the exposure of these composers, and it's strange because I do think in other fields it's not the same. It doesn't seem to be the same in the visual arts, doesn't seem to be the same in literature, but music seems to be sort of not quite caught up yet. I don't know why that is, but
Interesting.
there's a hint.
Yes, a hand back there. Yeah, can you just shout it?
Sure. Keeping the keynote, Professor Batstone. I was wondering, in your research, have you identified to what extent there are kind of specific, concrete rejections of that ethno-national definition of Ukrainian identity, as opposed to a kind of expansion in the diversification? So the exclusion of one thing versus the inclusion of a lot of other things.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I guess, that it depends on the sphere and depends on who you're talking to. I mean, I have been surprised, I think, as someone who comes from a certain kind of community in North America that has an association with Ukrainian culture, to speak to some young Ukrainians who are pretty vocal about the rejection of figures like Khmelnytsky, who we are sort of taught are like these great heroes of Ukraine, and are complicated as are all great national heroes, I suppose. That some people are sort of over that and want to construct kind of a new version of Ukrainian identity, but not everyone. So there are, of course, spheres where there is still a preservation of sort of a more traditional Ukrainian culture, and then also expanding that idea, but not rejecting some of these like particular heroes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is sort of outside of this meeting, but I'm curious, what was Ukrainian culture, not necessarily music, like before 1917 under Tsar's control? There must be some tradition there already, since like 13th century and so forth.
Musical
And
culture?
how do contemporary people see that tradition?
Musical culture, or
Well, actually, music is fine, but I'm also interested in literature, visual art, anything.
so
Dance.
that culture has been extremely well preserved by the Ukrainian communities in North America. So in Canada and the United States, people who were forced to leave because of the revolution have been amazing at preserving that moment in cultural history. And my impression, and there's probably people in the room who are better equipped to answer this question than me, but my impression is that it's very much tending towards a kind of folk identity. So the idea of a urban Ukrainian culture before 1917 is not so well known, I would say. There's a lot of the celebration of sort of life in the village, life out in nature, and you can go and see Ukrainian dance, traditional Ukrainian artworks like the decoration of Ukrainian Easter eggs called pisanki, and dolls that were made called montanka dolls at our Ukrainian museum in the East Village. But I think actually, at least here, that culture, that part of Ukrainian culture is very well preserved.
And how do people today, artists, look at those traditions? Do they sort of try to revive them, or it's just unconsciously in their heads?
I think
What is it like?
a little bit like the previous question, it depends on the person. So there is certainly a trend in Ukrainian compositional history that has a kind of neo-folkloric component to it. The Kupala songs that were performed last night by the Dumka chorus come from an opera that Stankovic wrote called When the Fern Blooms, and it is very much a kind of folk story. So there are people who want to kind of revive and reimagine those traditions, and then I think that there are composers who are not interested really in that at all and are more interested in participating in whatever the most avant-garde new music traditions are. Lev, do you want to?
I was just going to say, speaking of, preserving the folk tradition, we actually have somebody in the audience, Julian Patasti, who's a fabulous bandura player,
Yes.
who preserved this century-old tradition of the roaming bard who would sing
Yes.
the classical legends about the Ukrainian Cossacks and so forth. So, Jules, maybe you want to stand up and let people know who you are?
Nice to see you back.
Yeah. I'd also like to point out that besides performing more or less authentic renditions of 17th century Ukrainian epic, I also took advantage of the New York experience to play contemporary improvisational music at Tonic and other clubs when those were around, with Derek Bailey, John Zorn, other people. So, and I think this is something that's very important in addressing this question, that this heritage be treated not only as a museum piece, but as a basis for contemporary and new music.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, very well said, by the way. Yes,
I'd
Sue.
like to address the question about what was culture like prior to 1917. And I'd more specifically like to address the issue of high culture, fine art culture. We need to remember that if there was any kind of artistic talent in Ukraine, the only way that that talent could be developed would be to go to St. Petersburg or to Moscow. And so once these artists from Ukraine ended up in St. Petersburg or Moscow, they became absorbed into the Russian fine arts culture. And so oftentimes it would seem like there were no great artists in Ukraine because these names were totally assimilated within Russian culture. So that is a major reason and a stumbling block for stifling, in a sense, Ukrainian cultural development, high cultural development on its territory.
And Rosalets is a perfect example of
Yes.
that kind of figure.
Exactly.
I should add that it was
Yes.
very, I stumbled that he was Ukrainian well into my initial research 10 plus years ago. I mean, it's not, he's a Soviet composer and you just assume he's Russian, unfortunately, yeah.
Were were the people that went necessarily associated with the conservatories or just within the community?
I was speaking about artists, painters.
Oh, painters, okay.
There was no academy in Ukraine. The only academy was in St. Petersburg
I see.
and then the Moscow school. So there was no opportunity to get the finest, highest end of education in Ukraine.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Let's see, another hand.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
No.
No, either one, yeah.
No, I was pointing to her.
Yeah. Oh, okay,
This
please.
could be answered by anything else, but I would be interested to know how the current war between Russia and Ukraine has been dealt with by musicians, and if there are any sort of constraints that might prevent them from expressing themselves through music about the war, or if this has been a common topic.
Yeah, there's been a lot of music. Maria Sonovetsky talks about this a little bit in her book on Ukrainian folk music and popular music. I have an essay coming out about Silvestrov's these Maidan settings of music, and certainly this has drawn nothing but attention to him. And he's been on TV shows. I mean, go on YouTube and look for his comments about the Maidan, the never ending.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more specifically about the war.
About the war.
About the war between Ukraine and
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing concern. I can't speak directly to the pop music. That's not something I've explored in any great detail. I don't know if you have either.
Well, some of the pieces that are being performed today, this afternoon, are specific responses to the war, to things that both the annexation of Crimea, as well as the sort of establishment of New Russia, the Novorossiya republics in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. So, I mean, I think for Ukrainian composers, it's certainly a topic that promotes, that inspires a lot of inspiration, inspires a lot of creativity to compose new works. And I don't think if they're working in Ukraine, they won't feel any kind of hesitation, I think, to express that. Whether or not they can then travel to Russia is maybe another question, but
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was the big deal when Sylvester was supposed to have his 7th symphony performed in Moscow in 2014, and he pulled it because he didn't want to go to Russia. But what was interesting, when I was in Moscow in May 2019, his bagatelles were played by Alexei Lubimov, and everyone was noticing how it was just not an issue anymore. Like somehow that tension that was around 2014 had died down 5 years later, and even though the war is still going on, as we all know, it wasn't affecting him in the same, which I find interesting, considering how engaged he had been before.
Let's see another hand up. No more questions? Okay, let's give this great, fantastic panel a warm response. Thank you.